Hello whisky fans, welcome back. And there we have it. That is the end of the 2020 Master of Malt Drinks by the Dram Whisky Advent Calendar. So I don't expect that many people are going to watch this video because you're probably all busy doing Christmas things, but I thought I'd just do a little recap of the rankings and what we've been through over the course of these 24 drams. I don't think there's a secret hidden one in there anywhere. Sort of lifting the curtain here. Oh, that's a bit odd. Drinks by the dram. Hopefully that's all recyclable. I'm sure it is. So what have we learnt here? Well, the first thing is that miracles obviously do happen at Christmas because the unthinkable has happened, and I've actually put a blended Scotch in the #1 spot, and I really didn't expect that to happen. I suppose I should get these off the wall now. And I do suspect that this is probably going to rip some of the paint off with it. So I don't know about you, but I'm probably going to be spending Boxing Day doing a little bit of redecorating. Maybe next year I'll invest in a proper board that doesn't involve putting blue tack onto paint. So, last place. I feel really bad about this because it's not a bad distillery in any way, but the Glenrothes 12-year-old Soleo collection came out dead last. Now, Glenrothes is a distillery that I really like. I'd actually rank the distillery higher than I would rank, definitely higher than Dalmore, higher than Fettercan, possibly higher than Benriach, definitely higher than Macallan. But this expression in particular, I believe it is bottled at 40%, and it was just too weak. It was a little bit on the young side, to be fair, but it's just too weak, and that was the thing that meant that this came out in last place. So above that, we had the World Whisky Blend from the Boutique Whisky Company. So that is, ripping bits of the wall off, that is as far as I'm aware, a mystery blended whisky. I've no idea what goes into it, from Master of Malt themselves. And I thought that it was a really weird one. It was a little bit, or a lot, of an oddball. And it definitely didn't taste anything like Scotch to me. I'd be surprised if there's any actual Scotch gone into it. I'd kind of be surprised if there's any bourbon in there. It was definitely different, but not one for me. Above that, we had the Brenne, so going across the water from where I am at least, over to France. The Brenne QV Special. Now this one, I think I'm going to give this one the Wooden Spoon Award for just the most oddball and different, is the word I'm going to use, whiskey out of all of these ones. Because if you watched my review for this one, or if you've ever had this one, it's like it's not like whiskey, it's like someone got those foam banana sweets and distilled it with some sort of medicine, and the result is really, really strange. Above that we had the Mackmyra Vintersol, and this one I feel a little bit the same towards this as the Glenrothes Soleo collection, because the Vintersol is not a bad whiskey in any way. Mackmyra over in Sweden, they're doing a really good job, and the Vintersol is perfectly nice, perfectly drinkable. If you were given a bottle, you'd be very grateful. But it was a little bit tame, especially when you compare it to the other Mackmyra release that we had in the Advent Calendar. Moving up, we had Teeling. So Teeling is the distillery in the city of Dublin in the Republic of Ireland. Actually I think there's another new distillery just opened very recently. The Libertines, I think they sell whiskey under the brand The Dubliners, which there may be a review of coming soon, but Teeling used to be the only distillery in Dublin. And we had Teeling's Small Batch, which was their standard expression, And again, that's not a bad whisky at all. Me personally, I'm not a huge fan of Irish whisky, but Teeling small batch, a little bit pricey for what it is, I think, but it was okay. Above that, we had another one that I'd never had before, which I've heard a lot of positive things on YouTube about, and that's Green Isle. So this is from the Character of Islay Whisky Company, which I think is another Master of Malt product. I'm not 100% on that. But Green Isle is a blended whisky mainly from Islay, and a lot of people really like it. I thought it was a little bit young, didn't like it that much, probably won't ever be buying a bottle of that one. Not that it was that terrible. Fetterken 12-year-old. So Fetterken is one of those distilleries that I want to like it because it seems a little bit traditional, like they do things properly the old way. I'm not sure if that's true, but Fetterken 12-year-old, it was a good whisky, just not mind-blowing. Moving up from that, we've got the Dalmore Cigar Malt. Now this one, if I was taking price into account, this one would probably be much lower on the leaderboard, but I try not to do that because I am trying to be as objective as I can be when I taste these whiskies. And the Dalmore Cigar Malt, it was a reasonably nice, pretty heavily sherried, quite traditional whisky. Nothing at all wrong with it, but I think that was really probably the right place on our leaderboard for the Dalmore Cigar Malt. What is a lot better though, and I think we're really starting to get into the realms of the whiskies that I really enjoyed now, the Benriach 12-year-old Sherrywood. Now Benriach, again, is another distillery that does traditional, heavily sherried and also peated whisky occasionally. And the Benriach 12-year-old, apart from being a little bit underpowered, the same as the Glenrothes Soleo, was a really nice sherried whisky. And I would say that probably is one that I do recommend. And probably all the others from that point up, they're all probably, unless there's any really expensive ones on there that I've missed, anything above this point is probably worth your money. Next on the leaderboard, we have the other entry from Sweden, Mackmyra Svensk Rock Amerikansk Ek, which I've probably mispronounced again, but this release I thought was a lot better than the Wintersol. That smokiness, which was really unusual, I'm not sure if that was a peat smoke or some sort of wood smoke, but it really complemented the slightly unusual and very unique Swedish spirit on that one. If you're looking for something different, I'd probably recommend that one. And I'm aware that I just said that everything above that point back there was probably worth your money, but probably with the exception of this one. The Macallan 12-year-old double cask. It's a good whisky, and evident in the fact that I put it above the Dalmore and even above the Benriach. But this stuff is really quite overpriced in my opinion, although Macallan 12-year-old double cask was a solid whisky and I did enjoy it. But saying that, I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the Darkness 8-year-old. So this was another Master of Malt product, and this one was an 8-year-old whisky, and I believe it had a finishing period in Spanish or European oak octaves, so very small barrels, like half the size of a quarter cask, and that gave it quite a nice spiciness. And I think that the Darkness 8-year-old, it seemed like it was a lot older than 8 years old. I quite liked that one as well. Moving up again, we had the Glenfarclas 15-year-old. So I think the Glenfarclas 15-year-old, there's quite a few sort of traditional sherry matured whiskies on here, and that doesn't tend to be the way that I go when I'm shopping for a whisky. But I think that the Glenfarclas 15-year-old is good because I think that their 15-year-old expression is really the breakthrough point. It's where the Glenfarclas range becomes a little bit better value and it really starts to shine. I think if you've never had a bottle of Glenfarclas and you're looking for one, the 15 is probably where I'd recommend that you start out. Moving up again, we had the Balvenie 14-year-old Caribbean cask. Now, this is one that I had before, and it's one that I think I'd forgotten how good it is. Now, the Balvenie 14-year-old Caribbean cask is another one that I really liked. And I'm not always a huge fan of rum casks. I think perhaps rum casks don't always have as obvious an effect on whisky, because we've all become accustomed to bourbon matured Scotch these days, and a rum cask is probably the closest thing to a bourbon cask in terms of what it does to the actual spirit. But the 14-year-old Caribbean cask from Balvenie is one that I think you really can smell and taste the influence of the rum cask, and that's another one that I really enjoyed. The Glenfiddich Experimental Series IPA cask. This is I had it before, so it wasn't a surprise this time, but when I first tried this, I was really surprised with this one too. Because IPA cask, it must be said, is not a traditional treatment, but the fact that they managed to get all of that hoppiness to actually transfer into the spirit is really something a little bit special. Moving up from there, we had the Isle of Jura 18-year-old. Now, Jura is, or the 18-year-old at least, is another one where if I was taking into consideration price, this one would be probably quite a bit lower as well. But Isle of Jura, it's better than it was. No, it's definitely better than the previous expression that's bottled at 42%. So hopefully that's a sign of things to come at Jura, and they'll continue to go from strength to strength, because I would really like to see that happen. Uncle Nearest 1856 Premium Whisky. This is one that I had absolutely no idea of when I took it out of the calendar right at the start. I'd never heard of it before, but I'm pretty sure, well, I know that this is a sourced whisky, and I'm pretty sure that it probably comes from the Jack Daniel's distillery, and I really liked it. Speaking of things that I'd never heard of, and I thought, what the hell, as soon as I took it out of the Advent calendar, Aerolite Lindsay 10-year-old from the Character of Islay Whisky Company. This is another one that I'd never heard of, and it's a truly bizarre name, but it's a really good and probably good value mystery malt from an Islay distillery, probably Kalila, but I really like this one, and that's probably one that I'd be tempted to buy a full bottle of at some point. If you like your smoky whisky, especially if you're into your Ardbegs and Kalilas, I'd probably advise having a look at that one too. We're now into the top 5, and this is where, in my generous festive mood, I awarded 2 whiskies a joint position for 5th place, the Laphroaig Triplewood and the Balvenie 14-year-old Week of Peat. Now, these whiskies, they're both presented at 48%, and they're both heavily peated, and it's a little bit like a role reversal, because Laphroaig is generally a bourbon matured whisky, generally first fill bourbon, and the Balvenie is almost exclusively sherried. And for these two, you've got the Laphroaig being matured in quarter casks and sherry casks, and the Balvenie being heavily peated and matured in American oak. And somehow they've pulled off the impossible, and they both work really well. And I think both of these are really good value, and I'd recommend them both. Now, Whistle Pig 10-year-old. So this is the highest entry on the leaderboard, which is a non-Scottish whisky, and it's a little bit hard to define because it's distilled in Canada and matured across the border in Vermont. But Whistle Pig is definitely one of my favourite North American whiskies, and if it wasn't so expensive, it's probably something that I'd have quite often. As it is, the price does put me off. I think that's a little bit too expensive for what it is, but what it is a really good world-class whisky. Getting towards the serious big players now in the top 3, and number 3 is the Bunnahabhain 12-year-old. So Bunnahabhain 12-year-old and Bunnahabhain Distillery in general has always had a special place in my heart. It's a wonderful distillery and they produce wonderful whisky, and the 12-year-old has always been one of my favourites, but trying it in the Advent calendar, it just reminded me quite how special it is, especially for a very affordable and reasonably available 12-year-old whisky. It's really quite something special, and for a while I was actually expecting it to come out first. Highland Park. So this is a very recent release. The Highland Park Valfather hasn't actually been out for that long, and it's a no age statement whisky, but Highland Park, despite the fact that I'm always giving them grief over the silly Viking branding, and the fact that their prices are generally a little bit high, they've done a really good job, both with the recent Dragon Legend and with this equally no-age statement Highland Park Valfather. And I'd actually say the Valfather has a really nice and surprisingly intense amount of that Orcadian peat to it. And I'd actually rank this one slightly above the Dragon Legend. And I really didn't expect, when this one came up and I put it above the Bunnahabhain 12, I didn't expect to have anything come out and even beat this one. But that's exactly what we had. Because yesterday, complete dark horse, complete underdog, we had the Perspective Series 21-year-old from Berry Brothers and Rudd. And I still don't know a lot about this whisky. We know from the sample bottle that it's a blended Scotch whisky. We don't know what goes into it. We're led to believe that it's 21 years old. I think it's probably a little bit older than that. I would guess that maybe the majority of it is 21 years old, but I think they've probably put some even older stuff in there. And for a blended Scotch whisky, I did not think in a million years that the number one in our leaderboard was going to be a blended Scotch. But it just goes to show that if blended Scotch is made properly, it can actually be really good, and it can even be good value as well. To the extent that I think I'm actually going to order a bottle of this one for myself. I think it's probably going to be between the Perspective Series and the Balvenie Peat Week. Those are the two that really surprised me and I probably enjoyed the most. Even though the Balvenie didn't come too close to the top, it's just something that I haven't had in a while, and it's something that I'm quite looking forward to having more of. So I think probably one of those two are going to be a purchase in my near future. So that's it. I think we're just about done with the 2020 Master of Malt Whisky Advent Calendar. Oh, that's better. If I've gained any new viewers over these videos of the Advent Calendar, make sure that you subscribe. And any new subscribers, I welcome you to the channel and I look forward to talking to you in the comments. I hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and I'll see you in the new year. Cheers.